Now, when I open the Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio, and by the way, I'll show you step by step how to open this, everything you need to know to get here later, so don't panic. But when I open the Management Studio and I type in a fairly simple Transact SQL statement, something like this, notice select an asterisk right here means give me all the columns from the human resources.employee table. And then I execute that, you will notice that it goes out to the database and it pulls those records that I asked for and returns them to me kind of in this table form. Notice I can scroll over and see all the columns that were returned. And then, of course, I can scroll down to see all the rows that were returned. And notice right down here, it returned 290 rows. Now, to understand what's going on here, let's talk just a minute about some Transact SQL basics. And to understand Transact SQL, we have to do a little history lesson. SQL, or the Structured Query Language, is a programming language that was designed for managing data in what we now know as relational database management systems. Now, most of the time, nowadays, if you say the word database, it's understood that you mean relational database management systems. You're not really talking about just a database of data. You're talking about an application like SQL Server that will build, design, create the tables, establish relationships between them, manage the data, do all sorts of things. That's a relational database management system. Now, SQL, the structured query language, was developed at IBM way back in the early 1970s, and around about 1986, it became a standard of the American National Standards Institute. Then, around about 1987, the International Organization for Standards, or for you Dilbert fans, ISO, followed suit. And so now we had some pretty strong standards for the structured query language in place. Now, this was big because it meant manufacturers of database products now had a standard so that the language that worked in any of those was, 90 to 100% transparent between or interchangeable between the two products. Now, let's talk about Transact SQL. T-SQL or T-SQL, you'll see it used both ways out there in the real world. Both of those stand for Transact SQL. Transact SQL is a Microsoft and Sybase proprietary extension to standard SQL. Well, here's what happened. You had the SQL standard out there, but it really didn't go far enough in Microsoft and Sybase's opinion because they were working on a joint effort to build what later became Microsoft SQL Server. And they wanted the language to offer some functionalities that made things easier and more efficient for the programmer and for the people using the database. And so they just went out and added these additional functionalities to the standard SQL version. Now, other companies have done this. Keep in mind, T-SQL or Transact SQL is the flavor of SQL that's used to manage data in Microsoft SQL Server products. And T-SQL retains most of the original SQL standards. It just kind of adds a few functionalities. Now, there's a lot of other flavors of SQL out there. There's PL SQL, there's PostgreSQL, there's a bunch of them. And the bottom line is each one of these adds a little bit of different functionalities to the standard SQL that's out there. But the good news for you is when you learn any one of these, you've learned 70 to 80% of all of them, since they're all based on that same foundation of standard SQL or structured query language. Now, understanding T-SQL is vital to working with Microsoft SQL Server Relational Database Management System. That is why it has become a focus on an individual exam out there in Microsoft certification tracks. And by the way, I'm going to talk about certification tracks in a separate video here in the course, so you might want to go look for that. But it's very important that you understand how to use Transact SQL. You go under the hood just a little bit to understand how it works and how to use it efficiently, and that's what we're going to concentrate on in this course.